June of 2026, police in Ohio executed search warrants at a rural home in Hamden. They weren't looking for 16 children living in squalor. They weren't expecting to find a house that would end up in headlines across the country. They were looking for Dina. Specifically, they needed genetic material from a man named Gary Siders Jr. That's it. That was the mission. Get the sample, log the evidence, move on to the next step in a case that had already been building for months. And what happened when investigators obtained that Dina and walked through the front door is a mystery that gets darker every time you look at it. Because the question here was never really just what the Dina would prove, it's who these children are. And the answer might involve something so disturbing that prosecutors have kept most of it sealed. Let me back up to where this really started. In December of 2025, law enforcement opened an investigation into child sexual abuse allegations. 2 minors. Unknown victims at that point, known only through whatever evidence authorities had gathered in those early weeks. That investigation led to charges against 2 men. Josh Saunders, 23 years old, Brandon Henderson, 40 years old. 2 names that, on the surface, seem to have nothing to do with the Siders family. 2 separate cases, 2 different investigations running on 2 different tracks. That's what everyone thought, including, it seems, some of the investigators themselves, at least in the beginning. But somewhere in the evidence gathered against Saunders and Henderson, somewhere in their confessions or their phone records or the web of connections between the people around them, investigators found something that changed everything. They found evidence pointing toward a 3rd person, a 3rd suspect, Gary Siders Jr. And they found it significant enough that they believed they had grounds to seek his Dina. That's the moment everything connected. In sexual abuse investigations, you don't just ask for someone's Dina because you have a hunch. You ask because you have biological evidence. You have something physical to compare it against. Maybe it's semen recovered from a rape kit done on a victim. Maybe it's bodily fluid found at a scene. But you have something specific, something concrete, something that will give you a definitive answer once you run the comparison. And prosecutors knew exactly what they were looking for when they sought Gary Jr.'s Dina. They were looking for a match. When law enforcement located him and executed the search warrants to collect his genetic material, investigators expected to confirm a connection to that earlier abuse case. They expected to walk out of that house with a swab, a sample, a piece of paper documenting the collection. What they didn't expect was what they found when they stepped through that door. 16 children. 16 human beings ranging from 20 months old to 18 years old, living in a 12 by 12 foot room, a room filled with trash and feces, a room where children who hadn't been to school, who hadn't seen a doctor, who hadn't been allowed to interact with anyone in the outside world, were kept in what can only be described as complete isolation. The conditions were so bad that authorities said they couldn't even reach certain areas of the home. There was that much garbage, that much filth, that much accumulated waste and decay built up over what appears to have been years, not months. Officers walked through that door looking for Dina evidence to solve a sexual abuse case involving 2 people who weren't even related to them by blood, at least not directly. They walked out having discovered 16 victims of prolonged neglect, abuse that went on for years, possibly decades, layered on top of whatever they had originally come to investigate. And they had to face a question that still hasn't been fully answered months later. Who are these children? Where did they come from? The birth certificates that surfaced in the aftermath show that at least 4 of the 16 children are documented as born to Elizabeth Siders and Gary Jr. Elizabeth is his wife. She's 33 years old now. She married Gary Jr. when she was 15 years old and he was 18. That was 18 years ago. 18 years of marriage. 18 years at minimum of isolation. 18 years of pregnancies that, as far as we can tell from what's been made public, went almost entirely undocumented by the outside world. But here's where it gets strange. The Attorney General's office stated in public interviews that they still don't know if investigators have recovered all the birth certificates, all of them, for 16 children. In 2026, with digital records and hospital documentation systems in place across the state, investigators still can't say with certainty that they have accounted for every birth in that house. Think about that for a second. Not we're still verifying the paperwork, not we expect to close this out soon. They genuinely do not know how many of these births were ever recorded anywhere. That statement alone should tell you something is deeply wrong with how this family existed on paper. What they do know about the births that are documented is disturbing enough on its own. Elizabeth Saunders gave birth to twins in 2022. Then she gave birth to twins again in 2024. Then she gave birth to twins one more time in 2025. 3 separate pregnancies, 3 separate sets of twins, all within a span of less than 3 years. All while she was apparently keeping 16 children locked in that single room. Stop for a second and think about the statistical probability of that. The chance that a woman naturally conceives twins 3 times in a row without fertility treatment, without a documented family history of twins, is somewhere between 1 in 200 and 1 in 400. Some reproductive endocrinologists have said the real odds are even worse than that once you factor in how rare it is for the pattern to repeat 3 separate times within such a short window. We're talking about something that shouldn't happen. That almost never happens, statistically speaking, and yet, according to the birth records recovered so far, it happened in this household. But that's not even the strangest part. In November of 2022, Elizabeth gave birth to conjoined twins. Conjoined twinning is one of the rarest birth outcomes in the world. We're talking about 1 case in every 50,000 to 100,000 births. 1 in 50 to 100,000. It's the kind of thing hospitals write case studies about, the kind of thing that ends up in medical journals precisely because it happens so infrequently that most obstetricians will go their entire careers without seeing it once. And those twins died the same day. Natural causes, authorities said, but they were born in a home with apparently no prenatal care, no medical monitoring before birth, and no documentation of the pregnancy at all until after the children had already died. How is it that this family produced that kind of statistical rarity? How is it that another set of twins was born later that same year, and then again in the years that followed? When you line up all these facts stacked side by side, the pregnancy pattern stops looking random. It stops resembling the natural distribution of births you'd expect in any family. It starts looking like something that deserves very careful investigation, and apparently investigators agree, because that's exactly what's happening now. The court documents describe these pregnancies in language that's deliberately vague, almost clinical in how little it gives away. The indictment mentions multiple sets of siblings born across those years. It specifically notes what appear to be twins, using that careful, hedged phrasing prosecutors reach for when they're not ready to commit to a number in writing. But prosecutors won't say publicly exactly how many sets of twins there are, and the language they've chosen suggests there might be more of them than what's currently being discussed in public. The charges against Christina Saunders, Gary Jr.'s mother, allege that she abused 16 children born between May of 2022 and January of 2025. 18 months. 18 months of pregnancies resulting in 16 children arriving into that household. That works out to roughly 1 new child every month for a year and a half straight. For context, the average family in America has about 2 children total across a lifetime. This household had 16 children born in roughly the same window of time, while those children were apparently being kept in a 12 by 12 foot room with no access to the outside world. Now I need you to understand something about the Dina investigation, because this is where everything connects. The sexual abuse investigation that started with Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson in December of 2025 was looking into alleged crimes that happened years before charges were ever filed. The prosecutor stated that they sought Gary Jr. as Dina in relation to that child sex abuse case. Related to it, specifically meaning his genetic material was relevant somehow to a crime that had already been reported, meaning they had biological evidence tied to a victim that they needed to compare against a sample from him. In these kinds of cases, there are really only a handful of reasons investigators need a suspect's Dina. One reason is you have semen recovered from a rape kit, you have physical evidence of assault, and you need to establish who was responsible. That's one scenario. Another scenario is you have a victim who contracted a sexually transmitted infection, and you need to test the suspect to see if he carries it too. That establishes a medical link between the two of them. It proves he's the likely source. But there's a third scenario that nobody involved in the case has explicitly confirmed in a public statement, though multiple people following this case closely have connected the dots on their own. If a minor victim became pregnant, if there's a child who was born as a result of the sexual abuse itself, that would require paternity testing through Dina. No question about it. And here's where that possibility connects to everything else we've already talked about. Because when investigators started looking at the birth records and the genetic evidence tied to those 16 children, they realized they couldn't establish who was related to whom using documentation alone. There simply wasn't enough of a paper trail to work from. They needed Dina. They needed real, laboratory-confirmed genetic testing to figure out who the biological parents of these 16 children really were. Think about what that means for a second. Investigators have 16 children with unclear or undocumented parentage. They have pregnancy records showing what looks like a statistically impossible pattern. They have an incomplete set of birth certificates for a family that, by all appearances, has been living in the same general region for years. And they have a family that's been moving around Ohio for 2 decades without creating the kind of paper trail most ordinary families leave behind without even trying. A family that seems to have been erasing itself from official records, whether on purpose or simply by never engaging with the systems the rest of us pass through constantly. Doctors, schools, pediatric visits, census forms. So here's the question that haunts this case. When investigators needed Gary Jr.'s Dina for the sexual abuse investigation, were they simply looking for evidence that he assaulted someone, or were they looking for evidence that he fathered a child with a minor victim? And if that's what they found, if that's what the Dina came back showing, then what does that mean about the pregnancies we just spent the last several minutes walking through? What if some of those twins, some of those children born in that house during that specific window of time, weren't born to a mother and father living in what anyone would call normal circumstances? What if they were born from abuse? What if they were the product of a system of sexual exploitation operating quietly inside that household, hidden behind the isolation and the filth and the years of silence? The theory that's emerged in commentary following this case is this: what if not all 16 of these children are the biological children of Gary Jr. and Elizabeth? What if some of them were brought into the home from outside? What if some of them were trafficked in? What if some of them were born to other women who were also being kept somewhere in that house, hidden from view even more thoroughly than the 16 children investigators did find? Picture a household where children could simply appear, and nobody outside that property was ever in a position to ask where they came from, where pregnancies and births could happen with almost no documentation, no hospital visits, no records tying a birth to a specific date or a specific mother. where a young woman married at 15 could be kept in near total isolation for 18 years, her movements controlled, her access to the outside world restricted down to almost nothing, her autonomy stripped away one small decision at a time, until there was nothing left for her to decide on her own. That's not just abuse. That's systematic control, sustained over the better part of 2 decades. I've covered a lot of cases on this channel, and I can honestly say I've never seen something quite like this one. The way the pieces refuse to fit into a single, simple narrative. The way every answer investigators find seems to open up 2 or 3 new questions behind it. The way investigators appear to be peeling back layers of abuse that were stacked on top of each other, hidden inside each other, concealed behind documentation failures that, at this point, look less like negligence and more like something closer to design. The sexual abuse charges filed in August of 2026 are separate from the child endangerment charges tied to the conditions in that house. Gary Jr. and Elizabeth are both indicted on counts of sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, but the victims, according to court documents, are not their own children. The victims are other family members. That detail matters because it means the abuse being charged here was internal to the family structure, interfamilial, contained entirely within the network of relatives who had access to that house and to each other. Josh Saunders is Gary Jr.'s nephew. Brandon Henderson has family connections to the Siders network as well, according to what's been reported. Both men were being investigated for the sexual abuse of children well before Gary Jr.'s name ever entered the picture. And somewhere inside those investigations, somewhere in the evidence, the confessions, or the web of connections that surfaced during questioning, someone realized Gary Jr. was involved too, that he was connected to the same crimes, or to crimes closely related to them. That's the point at which they went for his Dina. But what were they actually investigating? What exactly did Saunders and Henderson say that pointed the investigation toward Gary Jr.? Those details remain sealed. Child sexual abuse cases protect that kind of information by law, and for good reason. The victims' identities are protected. The specifics of the abuse are sealed from public view. The public doesn't get to know what was said, what was revealed, or what was discovered during those interviews, and in a case involving children this young, that's exactly how it should be. What we do know is that by March of 2026, a second investigation was officially opened, this one aimed specifically at Gary Jr. and Elizabeth. And by June, police had gathered enough evidence to secure search warrants and walk through that house for the first time. They found 16 children. They found conditions that can only be described as deplorable. They found evidence of prolonged abuse stretching back years. And they found answers to some of the questions that had been building since December, while raising dozens of new ones nobody had thought to ask yet. Because here's what almost nobody has talked about publicly. If investigators believed Gary Jr. was involved in the sexual abuse of a family member, if they already had evidence pointing in that direction before they ever set foot on the property, why did it take a search warrant tied to that case to uncover the fact that he was also keeping 16 children in those conditions? Was the living situation itself connected to the sexual abuse? Was the extreme isolation, the total control, the near total erasure of these children from official records all part of one and the same system, rather than 2 unrelated problems that happen to exist under the same roof? Think about what it actually takes to keep 16 children hidden from the world for years at a time. You have to keep them out of school entirely. You have to keep them away from doctors, from dentists, from any medical professional who might ask questions or file a report. You have to make sure no neighbor ever gets a clear look at them. You have to document them as little as possible, if you document them at all. You have to control every single aspect of their world, down to what they see and hear and who they're allowed to speak to. You have to ensure somehow that not one of them ever talks to anyone outside the family for years. That level of isolation and control does not happen by accident. It's not the byproduct of poverty or bad luck. That's deliberate. That's systematic, built and maintained on purpose over a long period of time. And if that level of control was happening inside the house, if children were being isolated to that degree for that long, then the sexual abuse that led investigators there in the first place might not be a separate crime at all. It might be one piece of a much larger, more deliberate pattern, one where isolation and abuse were never really two different problems, but two functions of the very same system. What the DINA will eventually reveal once all the testing is complete and the results come back from the lab might show that the pregnancies inside that house weren't what they appeared to be on paper. It might show that some of these children were born out of abuse rather than into a relationship anyone would recognize as normal. It might draw a direct line between the original sexual abuse investigation and the true identities of the 16 children investigators are still working to piece together months after that first search warrant was executed. We're left for now with a set of facts that simply don't add up to anything normal. An investigation into sexual abuse that led, almost by accident, to the discovery of 16 hidden children, a pattern of twin pregnancies that shouldn't statistically exist, repeating itself across a remarkably short time frame, an incomplete set of birth records for 16 human beings who are, by every account, very much alive and now in the custody of the state. A family that appears to have spent 2 decades slipping through the cracks of every official system meant to catch situations exactly like this one. And DINA tests that investigators believe will finally answer questions about paternity, identity, and relationship that no amount of paperwork has been able to answer on its own. And underneath all of it sits the question that won't let go, the one that keeps this case from resolving into anything simple. How many of those 16 children are there because they were born into that family in the ordinary sense? And how many are there because they were brought into a system of abuse and control and exploitation that was already running long before any of this became public? There's no tidy way to close a case like this one out, not while it's still unfolding in real time. Every time a new detail becomes public, it tends to complicate the picture rather than simplify it. A birth certificate that raises more questions than it answers, a statement from the Attorney General's office that admits on the record that even investigators don't have a complete count, a pattern of twin births that any statistician would flag as improbable long before a detective ever would. None of it points toward one clean explanation. All of it points toward a family structure that operated almost entirely outside the systems the rest of us take for granted, and a set of children who are only now, for the first time in their lives, in a position where the outside world can finally see them. The investigation is ongoing. The charges are still being pursued through the courts. The evidence is still being built piece by piece as lab results come back and more of the sealed record becomes available to prosecutors. And somewhere in those sealed court documents, somewhere in the test results, the birth records, and the genetic analysis still being finalized, the answer to all of this is waiting. Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one. What do you think investigators are going to find when all the DANA results finally come back? If you want to follow this case all the way to the end, hit subscribe. Monsters don't exist, but people capable of monstrous things do.